Denzel Washington stood in the middle of a glass-walled testing floor, holding his daughter's backpack in one hand, and less than a minute later a man twice his size was lying face down on the mat, unable to lift his own arm. Nobody in the room had actually seen it happen, not the moment itself. 1 second the bigger man was charging forward, confident, smiling the way people smile when they already believe they've won. The next second he was gasping against the padded floor, and the smile was gone. Denzel didn't celebrate. He didn't even look down at the man he'd just put there. He simply reached down, adjusted the strap of a small pink backpack covered in cartoon stickers, and glanced up at the observation window, where a woman in a slate-gray suit stood frozen, one hand still raised halfway to her mouth. To understand how a broke, unemployed single father with a 6-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old Toyota ended up standing in the private testing arena of one of the most guarded companies in Charlotte, North Carolina, you have to go back 5 months. Back to a morning that started, like most mornings did for Denzel Washington, with something going wrong before 8 a.m. His daughter Sophie had woken up with a low fever, just enough to make her clingy and stubborn, and Denzel had spent 20 minutes negotiating her out of wearing a tutu to what she'd been told was a grown-up meeting. They compromised on light-up sneakers. He'd pulled into the parking deck of Ashford Sterling Group at 9:52 in the morning, 11 minutes late, with a juice pouch leaking quietly into his jacket pocket and Sophie humming a cartoon theme song he couldn't place. The building didn't look like the kind of place that hired men like him. Glass and brushed steel, a lobby with ceilings 3 stories high, a logo etched into black stone that didn't need to explain itself. Denzel had been to a lot of interviews over the past year. Almost all of them ended the same way, a firm handshake, a polite smile, an email 2 days later thanking him for his time. "Daddy, why does everybody dress the same?" Sophie whispered as they crossed the lobby floor. She wasn't wrong. Nearly every person they passed wore some shade of charcoal, navy, or black, pressed and tailored, shoes that cost more than Denzel used to make in a month back when he still had steady work. A woman near the elevators looked at them the way people look at something that doesn't belong in a photograph. Denzel was used to that look. He didn't flinch anymore. That was its own kind of exhausting. The receptionist on the security division floor was younger and kinder. She smiled at Sophie, asked her name, and let her pick a lollipop from a jar shaped like a rocket ship. Sophie took it without hesitation, and something in Denzel's chest loosened just slightly. At least somebody here didn't look at them like a mistake that had wandered in off the street. "Mr. Washington, you're here for the trial." The receptionist glanced at her screen, then frowned. "I don't have childcare listed on your intake form." "Is someone picking her up, or she stays with me?" Denzel said. His voice wasn't sharp. It also wasn't a question. "If that's a problem, I'll turn around right now." The woman studied him for a second, like she wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "She'll need to sit in the observation gallery. That's the only exception I can make." "That's fine." Sophie tugged his sleeve. "What's an observation gallery?" "It's where you get to watch Daddy do boring grown-up stuff," Denzel said, crouching to her eye-level, sticky lollipop and all. "You sit up high where it's safe. If you need me, you wave, and I'll see you. Promise." She hugged him around the neck, and he kissed the top of her head before standing and following the receptionist down a hallway that smelled like new carpet and expensive candles. The testing space wasn't the gym Denzel had pictured. It was closer to a small arena, padded floor marked with high lines, a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the skyline on one side, and on the other, stadium seating already half full of spectators in company polos. 12 other candidates stood scattered near the mat, all younger than Denzel by at least a decade, all in athletic gear that fit like it had been chosen on purpose. A few glanced his way, faded gray shirt, jeans, sneakers, 3 years old, and looked away unimpressed. He didn't blame them. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had been barely holding on for longer than he wanted to admit. A stocky man in a company polo stepped onto the mat, clipboard in hand, built like he'd once made a living out of not moving when other men hit him. Name's Dale Griggs. "I run the security operations program here, and I don't waste time. You're all here because somebody thought you might be worth a look." Emphasis on might. Simple rules: one opponent-controlled engagement, no weapons, no eye gouging, no groin shots. Everything else is fair game. 3 minutes. Impress me, you move forward. Bore me, you're out. He read down his clipboard. First up, Washington. Denzel Washington. A few candidates smirked. Someone muttered a joke under their breath. Denzel walked on to the mat. Griggs looked him over, unimpressed. You're what, 32? Most of these guys are fresh out of the military. You got recent combat experience? No. Certifications? Formal training? No. Griggs's frown deepened. Then what the hell are you doing here? I need a job, Denzel said, and met his eyes without blinking. Griggs turned toward the gallery. Miss Ashford, we've got a walk-in with no credentials on paper. You want me to skip him? Up in the gallery, a woman stood with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. Mid-twenties, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and definitely wasn't. A slate-gray blazers over a crisp white shirt. No jewelry except a watch that caught the overhead light when she moved. Claire Ashford, 26 years old, CEO of Ashford Sterling Group. Stanford, top of her class, a name business magazines, loved putting next to the word prodigy. She looked at Denzel for a long moment, the kind of look that stripped past the cheap sneakers and the tired eyes and asked what was underneath. Let him try, she said. Griggs shrugged and turned back. You're up against Reese. Went pro in the cage for 2 years before we hired him onto the roster. If you're smart, you tap before he breaks something. Reese stepped onto the Mazza, 6'3", roughly 240 pounds, shoulders like a linebacker, grinning the easy grin of a man who had never once doubted the outcome of a fight. No hard feelings, old man, he said. Denzel set Sophie's backpack down at the edge of the mat. He didn't stretch. He didn't bounce on his toes. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, breathing slow, and waited. Griggs raised his hand. 3 minutes. Go. Reese closed the distance in 2 steps, throwing a combination that would have put most men on the floor from the first punch. Denzel didn't block it. He shifted his weight a few inches, angled his shoulder, and let both punches pass close enough to stir the air against his face. Reese followed with a hook aimed at Denzel's ribs. Denzel caught the arm mid-swing, turned his hips, and used Reese's own momentum to spill him off balance. Reese stumbled, not with fear, but with the specific confusion of a man discovering for the first time that his body didn't fully belong to him anymore. He recovered fast, circling now instead of charging, faked left, then shot low for a takedown, clean, fast textbook. Denzel sidestepped, drove an elbow down between Reese's shoulder blades, and swept his legs out in one motion that looked almost gentle from a distance. Reese hit the mat hard enough that the sound carried to the back row of the gallery. He tried to scramble up. Denzel was already on him, not violent, not showy, just precise, locking the arm behind Reese's back and leaning in close enough that only Reese could hear him. Tap, Reese didn't tap. He tried to power out of the hold, twisting, using 240 pounds of leverage against a much smaller frame. Denzel adjusted his grip and applied pressure until Reese's free hand slapped the mat twice in rapid succession. Denzel released immediately and stood. Griggs checked his stopwatch, blinked at it, checked it again. 19 seconds. Denzel picked up the little pink backpack and walked off the mat without a word, while the room behind him stayed dead silent. Claire Ashford didn't move from the gallery rail. She had watched hundreds of trials over the years, reviewed footage of former Navy SEALs, Krav Maga instructors, championship wrestlers. She knew exactly what talent looked like on that mat. What she just watched wasn't talent. It was something else, no wasted motion, no adrenaline, no anger. Just absolute unnerving calm. She pulled out her phone before Denzel had even reached the door. Hire him today. Griggs's reply came back fast. You serious? He's got a 6-year-old, I know. Personal detail. Reporting directly to me, that complicates things. Then we'll uncomplicate them. Get him to my office. Now 40 floors below, Denzel was probably already thinking this had been another wasted morning, another polite rejection waiting for him by email in 48 hours. Claire smiled at the window, at the traffic crawling through downtown Charlotte like something with a slow, patient pulse. He had no idea what he'd just started. Griggs caught up with Denzel near the elevator bank. Washington, hold up. Ashford wants to see you. Why? Didn't say. You're not in trouble, if that's what you're thinking. I think she's about to offer you something. Denzel didn't let himself hope. He'd learned better than that a long time ago now. Kid can wait in the lounge, snacks, cartoons, the works. She'll be fine for 5 minutes. Sophie looked up at him with the kind of patience no 6-year-old soul should have to practice this much. 5 minutes, he told her, and she nodded like she'd heard that particular promise before and decided to trust it anyway. Claire's office occupied the top floor, and it wasn't the cold glass and chrome space Denzel expected. Bookshelves crowded with texts on engineering and economics, a worn leather couch, a coffee table buried under half-finished prototypes, a window that ran the entire length of one wall, high enough that the city below looked like something you could hold in your palm. "Sit," she said, without looking up from her laptop. When she finally did look at him, her gaze was direct, assessing, unhurried. "You're not what I expected. I get that a lot. Where did you train? Nowhere official." "Nowhere official," she repeated. "So you just taught yourself to take apart a professional fighter in under 20 seconds? Denzel said nothing. She leaned back. "I've run this company for 3 years. In that time, I've hired over 50 people for executive protection. Most last less than 6 months. Do you know why? No, because they think the job is about being intimidating. It isn't. It's about seeing the problem before it arrives. Making a decision in the gap between one breath and the next. Staying calm while everyone around you is losing their grip." She paused. "You understand that, maybe. I'm offering you a position on my personal security detail. You report to me directly. Base salary is $130,000, full benefits, a child care stipend, and flexible hours whenever the job allows it." Her eyes didn't leave his face. "I need someone I trust. Someone who won't flinch and won't ask questions when I need them to move fast." Denzel thought about the overdue rent notice folded on his kitchen counter, about the nights he'd lain awake calculating exactly how many more weeks he had before something broke that he couldn't fix. $130,000 was more than he'd earned combined over the last 3 years. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you walked into that arena looking like you didn't belong, and you walked out looking like you owned the building," Claire said. "You didn't showboat, you didn't grandstand, you did exactly what needed doing and nothing more. That's rare. So do you want the job, Mr. Washington?" "Yes," Denzel said, "I do. The first month was ordinary in the specific way that new beginnings are ordinary right before they aren't." Denzel learned the building's rhythms, learned which elevators were faster, learned that Claire took her coffee black and never asked for it, because someone always brought it to her before she had to. He learned the names of the people around her, her assistant, her head of legal, her chief financial officer, and a man named Marcus Dunbar, the company's longtime senior operating officer, a man everyone in the building treated the way people treat a favorite uncle who also happens to sign your paycheck. Marcus Dunbar was 58 years old, silver at the temples, always in a suit that looked tailored rather than bought, and he had a voice that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. He had been with Ashford Sterling since before Claire was born, brought in by her father decades earlier, the kind of executive whose photograph hung in the lobby beside the company's founding date. Everyone deferred to him. Claire herself deferred to him, in the particular way a daughter defers to the man who used to bounce her on his knee at company picnics. Denzel didn't trust him. Not at first for any concrete reason, just an old instinct, the kind that had kept him alive in rooms far less polished than this one. Marcus was polite to Denzel in the exact way that politeness feel like a wall. He never raised his voice. He never had to. His cruelty, when it surfaced, came wrapped in perfect grammar and reasonable policy. "I understand, Miss Ashford has taken a personal interest in your situation," Marcus said to him one afternoon in the executive kitchen, stirring his coffee with unhurried precision. "A single father, working security, no formal credentials. It's a generous gesture on her part. I'd hate to see it become a liability." "It won't," Denzel said. "See that it doesn't." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that never touched anything below the cheekbones. "This company runs on discretion, Mr. Washington. Discretion and knowing your place within a structure. I trust you understand the difference between being useful and being not comfortable." Denzel said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that some men needed the silence more than they needed an answer. It was 3 weeks later that Marcus found a reason to humiliate him in front of the entire executive floor. A missed badge scan at a side entrance, a 2-minute delay that meant nothing to anyone except a man looking for an excuse. Marcus called it out in the middle of a leadership meeting in front of 20 people, his tone calm and almost sympathetic, the way you might discuss a child who kept forgetting his homework. Perhaps Mr. Washington's previous line of work didn't require this level of attention to protocol, Marcus said, and a few junior staffers laughed, not cruelly, just uncomfortably, the kind of laughter that fills a silence nobody wants to sit inside. Denzel didn't respond. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, steady, while the room finished being uncomfortable on his behalf, and then he went back to work. That night at home, Sophie asked him why he'd seemed tired in a different way than usual, and he told her it had just been a long day. He didn't tell her about the meeting. Some weights weren't hers to carry, what none of them knew yet. Not Denzel, not Claire, not the 20 people in that meeting, who'd laughed a little too easily, was that Marcus Dunbar's discomfort with Denzel had almost nothing to do with badges or protocol. It had everything to do with the fact that Denzel Washington noticed things, and Marcus Dunbar had spent the last 18 months making very sure that nobody noticed anything at all. The anonymous threats started arriving 2 months before Denzel was hired, vague, untraceable messages to Claire's private line, warnings dressed up as concern. Nothing illegal, nothing you could take to the police, just enough to make her nervous, enough that she'd started sleeping with her phone face up on the nightstand, waiting for something she couldn't name. Then the money started disappearing. It began small, a rounding error here, a vendor payment slightly padded there, the kind of thing an auditor might dismiss as a clerical mistake in any other quarter. Denzel noticed it first, not because he understood finance, but because he understood patterns, the same way he understood the rhythm of a punch before it landed. He mentioned it to Claire almost apologetically, half expecting her to tell him it wasn't his job to look at spreadsheets. Instead, she pulled up the number herself, and her face went pale in a way Denzel hadn't seen since the day they met. "This isn't a mistake," she said quietly. "Somebody's been doing this for months." Over the following weeks, what had looked like scattered errors resolved into something far uglier, a coordinated pattern of payments routed through shell vendors, invoices for services that had never been performed, technical schematics quietly extracted from the company's most secure servers and sold to a competitor overseas. Whoever was behind it wasn't stealing money. They were dismantling Ashford Sterling from the inside, one careful cut at a time, doing things slowly enough that nobody would notice until there was nothing left to save. Denzel and Claire worked late into the night for 3 straight weeks, cross-referencing access logs, tracing wire transfers through accounts that had been built specifically to disappear. On the 3rd night, Denzel found the thread that connected everything, and it led directly to a name he hadn't expected. Not because it was surprising exactly, but because it was the last name either of them wanted to be true. Every Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, Marcus Dunbar met privately with the company's chief financial officer, a woman named Renee Callahan, in meetings that never appeared on any official calendar. Renee had purchased a lake house in cash 3 months earlier, $4.1 million, no mortgage. Her husband had bought a vintage sports car outright 2 weeks after that. None of it is legal on its own. All of it was far more than a CFO's salary could explain. But it was Marcus's fingerprints running underneath all of it. His authorization codes on the shell vendor contracts, his private line calling a broker in the middle of the night, his signature buried 3 layers deep on the wire transfer that had funded the very first payment 18 months earlier. The man everyone trusted, the man whose photograph hung in the company lobby, the man Claire had called family more than once in casual conversations, he was the architect of all of it. Claire stared at the evidence on the screen for a long time without speaking. "He's been in my father's office since before I could read a balance sheet," she finally said. "He walked me down the aisle at my sister's wedding because my father was too sick to do it. And he's been robbing us blind the entire time." "We need proof he can't talk his way out of," Denzel said. "Not whispers, not suspicion, something a courtroom can't argue with." "How?" "We let him think he's still safe. We wait for him to make one more move, and this time we're listening." The investor gala was 4 due away, the single biggest night on the company's calendar, the night every major shareholder, board member, and reporter in the Southeast would be under one roof. If Marcus and Renee were planning a final catastrophic move, that was when it would happen. Maximum visibility, maximum damage. The kind of public collapse that would end Ashford Sterling permanently and take Claire's reputation down with it. Denzel planted a tracker on Renee's car during a late executive session, and on the second night at 9:47, it began to move. He followed from 3 cars back, down through the industrial district on the south side of the city, past warehouses with half their windows dark, until Renee's car stopped outside a loading dock that looked abandoned by daylight and deliberately invisible by night. A second vehicle arrived 5 minutes later. A man in a gray suit stepped out, nervous, unfamiliar, the kind of face that belonged to someone paid to disappear the moment the job was finished. Denzel recorded everything from a block away, the envelope changing hands, the short, tense conversation, the phone call Renee made the instant the second car pulled away. He didn't need audio to understand what he was watching. He had more than enough. The next morning, Claire watched the footage twice in complete silence, then closed her laptop up and pressed both hands flat against her desk, like she was trying to keep the whole building from tilting. "We take this to the board, now." "Not yet," Denzel said. "If we move now, they scatter. Destroy evidence, disappear before anyone can hold them accountable. We need them exposed in the one place they can't run from, in front of every investor, every board member, every camera in that room. We let them believe they've already won, and then we take it all away from them, publicly, permanently." Claire looked at him like he'd lost his mind, and then, slowly, like she understood exactly what he meant. The night of the gala, the top floor of Ashford Sterling had been transformed, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the entire skyline, string lights strung across exposed steel beams, 300 of the company's most important people in evening wear, moving through champagne and quiet conversation like nothing in the building had ever been threatened. Marcus Dunbar worked the room like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing at exactly the right moments, his silver hair catching the light every time he turned his head. Renee Callahan stood near the bar in a navy dress, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, smiling at anyone who caught her eye. Neither of them noticed Denzel standing near the far wall in a suit that fit him now in a way his old clothes never had. Neither of them noticed Claire watching from the small stage at the front of the room, her expression calm in a way that should have terrified them both. At exactly 9 o'clock, Claire stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, and the room quieted the way rooms quiet when someone important is about to speak. "Before we move into the evening's program, I need to share something with you. Something that's taken my team the better part of a month to confirm beyond any doubt." Marcus's smile didn't move. Renee's grip on her portfolio tightened almost imperceptibly. "Over the past 18 months, this company has lost $32 million through a coordinated scheme of fraudulent vendor contracts, falsified invoices, and the theft of proprietary technology sold to a foreign competitor," Claire continued, her voice steady, carrying across the silent room. "Tonight, with the full cooperation of federal investigators, I can tell you that we know exactly who orchestrated it." Somewhere near the bar, a phone began buzzing insistently in Renee's clutbag. She didn't answer it. She couldn't. 2 men in dark suits were already crossing the room toward her, badges in hand, and every head in the ballroom turned to follow them. Marcus Dunbar's composure held for exactly 4 more seconds. Then it didn't. "Claire," he said, low urgent, stepping toward the stage. "Whatever you think you've found, I can explain." "You already tried that explanation, Marcus," Claire said, and for the first time all night her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for the whole room to hear how much it cost her. "In the tapes, in the wire transfers with your authorization code on them. In 18 months of my father's trust that you spent like it was nothing." 2 more agents moved through the crowd toward Marcus, and the room that had been holding its breath finally exhaled into a wave of horrified murmurs, phones lifting to record, camera flashes catching the exact moment the most respected man in the building became the most disgraced. Marcus didn't run. He simply stood there, hands slowly rising as an agent reached him, his eyes finding Denzel across the room, the man he'd dismissed as a liability, the man whose quiet competence had finally completely undone him. "You," Marcus said, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. "This whole time, it was you." You had 18 months, to be honest, Denzel said quietly. You spent all of it deciding I wasn't worth noticing. They led Marcus out through a side door, past the string lights and the champagne towers, past 300 people who had spent decades trusting his name, and none of them said a word on his behalf. Renee was already gone, escorted out the far entrance, her portfolio confiscated, her face a mask of controlled panic that fooled absolutely no one anymore. The fallout took months to fully surface. Marcus Dunbar was charged with wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy, facing a sentence that would keep him well past his 70th birthday. Renee Callahan cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced term, a mid-level operations director who had been feeding stolen schematics directly to Marcus in exchange for a cut small enough to seem harmless and large enough to ruin his life anyway. Claire testified for 11 hours across 2 separate proceedings. She did interviews, met privately with rattled investors, rebuilt trust one conversation at a time in a way that no press release could have managed alone. Slowly, the company stabilized, stock prices recovered, new contracts came in. The board stopped looking at her like she was one headline away from losing everything. 6 months after the gala in a federal courtroom in downtown Charlotte, Marcus Dunbar stood for sentencing. He'd lost 20 pounds since the arrest. His silver hair had gone the rest of the way to white. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he was quiet for a long moment, the same practiced, unhurried pause he'd once used to make junior staffers wait for his verdict on their competence. This time, there was nothing practiced in it. I spent 30 years telling myself I was protecting this company, Marcus said, his voice unsteady in a way no one in that boardroom had ever heard from him. That the rules I enforced, the people I dismissed, the ones I decided weren't worth my attention, I told myself all of that was discipline. Standards. He looked toward the back of the courtroom where Denzel sat quietly beside Claire. I looked at a man who walked into that arena with nothing, and I decided before he'd said a single word that he didn't belong in my building. I was wrong about him, and I understand now that I was wrong about a great many things for a great many years, and it cost people far more than it ever cost me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for it. I only wanted it said, once, out loud, before I stopped having the chance to say it at all. The judge sentenced him to 18 years. Marcus didn't protest. He simply nodded, once, like a man finally setting down something he'd carried far too long, and let the marshals lead him out of the room. Through all of it, Denzel and Claire kept meeting for coffee, quietly at first at a crowded shop 3 blocks from the office where nobody recognized either of them. It became a routine, then something more than a routine. They talked about everything and nothing. Work, the city, Sophie's increasingly elaborate opinions about dinosaurs, the particular ache of building a life back up after it had been taken apart. Neither of them called it dating. It was something that didn't need a name yet to be real. One Thursday in late autumn, Claire showed up with a gift bag far too large for the coffee shop's small tables. Inside was a stuffed triceratops, bright green with absurdly detailed purple spots. You remembered she likes dinosaurs, Denzel said. Of course I did. Claire watched him fold the bag closed. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Do you ever regret taking this job? After everything? Denzel thought about the late nights, the fear, the weight of the last 6 months pressing down on both of them in different ways. Then he thought about Sophie's new school, the one with the art program and a playground with swings that didn't have rust on the chains. He thought about the apartment with 2 real bedrooms, and the night he'd told Sophie they didn't have to worry about rent anymore, and the way she'd hugged him so hard he'd almost lost his balance. No, he said, I don't regret it. Claire nodded, like she'd needed to hear that more than she'd let herself admit, and reached across the table to take his hand. 3 weeks later, Sophie's birthday party filled a small park near their new apartment. A handful of kids from school, the babysitter, Dale Griggs and his wife, and Claire, who arrived with a gift bag so large Sophie could barely lift it. Inside was a remote-control dinosaur that walked and roared on its own, and Sophie screamed with a joy loud enough to turn heads 3 picnic tables away. You spoil her, Denzel said, watching Claire settle onto the bench beside him. Someone has to, Claire said, and they sat together in the kind of silence that didn't need filling, watching Sophie chase a mechanical dinosaur across the grass until she was laughing too hard to run anymore. A year later, Denzel still ran security for Ashford Sterling, though the company barely resembled the one he'd walked into that first morning. More transparent, more careful, rebuilt on something sturdier than one family's inherited trust. Sophie had stopped calling Claire Miss Claire month earlier, dropping the title without ceremony, the way children do when someone has quietly, permanently become family. Claire kept a drawer at her apartment now, full of small things, pajamas, a spare toothbrush, a stuffed triceratops with one ear slightly chewed. They hadn't rushed anything. They hadn't made declarations they weren't sure they could keep. They had simply showed up again and again on the good days and the hard ones, because that was what people did when they decided something was worth protecting. One evening, Denzel found Claire in her office, staring at a small framed drawing on her desk. Three stick figures in front of a house, a lopsided yellow sun in the corner, Sophie's handwriting labeling each figure with careful 6-year-old letters. "I keep it here," Claire said without turning around, "to remind me what actually matters, on the days this job tries to convince me otherwise." Denzel crossed the room and kissed the top of her head, the same way he used to kiss Sophie's before walking into rooms that didn't want him there. "Yeah," he said, "me too. If there was one thing Denzel Washington had learned over the past year, it was that life rarely hands anyone a clean ending. It hands you small, imperfect moments and leaves the rest up to you, whether you spend your life guarding the door or finally decide to open it and let somebody in. It isn't always easy. There are hard conversations, bad days, moments you wonder if any of it was worth the risk. But then your daughter runs toward you with a smile that fills an entire room, and the person you've chosen looks at you like you are exactly, finally, where you're supposed to be, and you understand, all at once, that it was worth it. Every part of it. Because in the end, the things that hold a life together aren't the ones you can put on a balance sheet. They're the trust you rebuild after it's broken. The people who choose to stay when leaving would be easier, the quiet decision made over and over to keep showing up. Denzel Washington had walked into that testing arena a year earlier with nothing but a backpack covered in cartoon stickers and a 6-year-old who believed in him before he'd learned to believe in himself again. Now he had something he thought he'd lost for good, a family, not a perfect one, not one without scars, but real and built on the one thing that no title, no signature, and no amount of money had ever been able to fake: